Good morning. It is Monday, March the 15th, and this is The Drill. Daily Declarations for Spiritual Warfare. March 15th, I will teach you to do my will. I will guide you always. I will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. You will raise up the age-old foundations and will be called repairer of broken wells, restorer of streets with dwellings. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Do not throw away your confidence in my will, for it will be richly rewarded. Continue with perseverance, for when you have done my will, you will receive what I have promised you. Daily Declaration. Lead me and guide me for your name's sake. Guide me into all truth. Lead me in a plain path because of my enemies. Make your way straight before my eyes and make the crooked places straight and the rough places smooth before me. Help me to stand firm in all your will, mature and fully assured. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. May your Spirit lead me on level ground. Amen. Thank you. And now I'm going to read chapter 4 from the book, The Ten Commandments of Progressive Christianity. Chapter 4 is entitled, Gracious Behavior is More Important Than Right Belief. And this book is really important because it really explains what the left is doing. As I've always said, it's not so much important what the left is saying. Ask yourself, what are they doing? And this is one of the things that they're trying to brainwash you into believing. They're brainwashing you to believe that gracious behavior is more important than right belief. As we've seen, progressive Christianity is largely defined by its focus on morality and its downplaying of doctrine. What truly matters, we are told, is not what we believe, but how we behave. This brings us to the fourth commandment. Gracious behavior is more important than right belief. Upon a first reading, there is room here for some common ground. We certainly would agree that gracious behavior should characterize the church, though there may be disagreement about what exactly that entails. At a minimum, we could say that the church and Christians should be patient, gentle, kind, and loving to everyone, even those who have different theological convictions. Yet there are a number of concerns that arise from the way this commandment is phrased, and with the way Gully fleshes out the specifics. The prioritization of behavior over theology sells well to our modern world because the general population already has the idea that people who care about theology are divisive, narrow, dogmatic, and even mean. What matters instead, we are told, is that we simply be kind to people. Gully drives home this stereotype by comparing people who care about theology with the Pharisees. The problem with the Pharisees, argues Gully, is that their fixation on orthodoxy and their misguided quest for theological purity. Translation, if you care about orthodoxy, you are probably just another Pharisee. Leaving aside the ungracious nature of this comparison, we can simply observe how historically inaccurate it is. Jesus never said the problem with the Pharisees is that they are too concerned with orthodoxy. The problem with the Pharisees was legalism, putting man-made laws ahead of God's, and hypocrisy, saying one thing and doing another. And the two often went together. It wasn't that they cared too much about good theology, but that they cared too little. Their theology was a mess. It glorified man, twisted God's own priorities, and selectively followed God's law. This raises an important point. Teaching people good theology is not the problem, but the solution. Teaching people good theology is a vital, essential way of caring for them. Rather than viewing theology as something that harms and oppresses people, we should be reminded that good theology actually comforts and liberates people. The Pharisees harmed people by precisely by teaching them and modeling for them bad theology. Another issue with the fourth commandment is the dichotomy it creates between behavior and doctrine. The former is simply more important than the latter, we're told. But the problem here is that the two cannot be so easily divided. Indeed, any declaration about right or wrong behavior is theological declaration. One cannot determine godly behavior in the absence of sound theological categories and concepts. For behavior is only right if it fits with God's law and God's character. There's a rich irony here. The statement, gracious behavior is more important than right belief, is itself a statement about what we should believe. Apparently, right belief matters after all. Gully's push to prioritize behavior over doctrine is driven by a simple conviction, namely, that it leads people to be more gracious. He claims, quote, Jesus knew ungracious behavior often had its roots in a misguided quest for theological purity, unquote. In other words, good theology doesn't tend to produce gracious behavior. Instead, argues Gully, we get more gracious behavior from people by focusing more on, well, their behavior. It is here that Gully has come full circle and returned to the first of his progressive commandments, namely that Christianity is more about morality than about worshiping Jesus. Simply put, Gully's basic argument is that gracious behavior flows most readily from moralism. Of course, the sad reality is that it was actually the Pharisees, not Jesus, who were committed to moralism, and their moralism did not in any way make them more gracious. Again, there's an irony here. While on the one hand, Gully critiques the ungracious nature of the Pharisees, on the other hand, he advocates the Pharisees' own moralistic methodology. This is universally applied, or universally what happens when doctrine and theology are disparaged. All you're left with is a religion of being nice to other people. If we really want to become people who are more gracious, the answer is not to focus on our behavior and try harder. Instead, the answer is to focus on Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who gave his life to pay the debt of our sins and empower us by the Spirit to live a new life. It is then that we can really love others selflessly. J. Gresham Machen once more sums it up well. Quote, the strange thing about Christianity was that it adopted an entirely different method for how people change. It transformed the lives of men not by appealing to the human will, but by telling a story. Not by exhortation, but by the narration of an event. The lives of men are transformed by a piece of news. Unquote. The Christian approach requires that we think theologically. In the end, it's clear that right behavior is not more important than right theology. Both are important. As Paul reminds us, quote, keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching, unquote. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16. And that was chapter 4 of the book, The 10 Commandments of Progressive Christianity. And again, it's vital to understand this because when you're dealing with the left, you have to understand what it is that they're trying to do rather than what it is that they're trying to say. Thank you. And now I'm going to read the foreword, or part of it perhaps, of the book called Defending Boyhood by Anthony Esolen. We would think that a book, who would think that a book needs to be written defending boyhood? Alas, given the sorry state of our gilded culture, the need has never been so acute. Our national emasculation is obvious and without precedent in the history of a great country founded by men. Even many a male lamely prattles on about the newest malady supposedly plaguing the zeitgeist, toxic masculinity. Read masculinity. Yes, a book defending boyhood is direly needed, and Tony Esolen is just the guy to do it. In a Western world increasingly lacking men with chests, Esolen is a man with courage, unafraid to stand athwart the modernists yelling halt. Esolen himself has been hounded by the wolves of political correctness who have pursued him hungrily. He doesn't care. He's nothing if not fearless. This book is a counterpunch from what is today the new counterculture, the likes of Esalen and the people at Tan Books, St. Benedict Press, and frankly any serious traditional Catholic, now represent just that, a counterculture. They are the sentinels beckoning us to return to that which is time-tested and true, whether they've thought of themselves that way or not. The mob of radical transformation have sought to remake marriage in their own image, sexuality in their own image, gender in their own image, and even boyhood in their own image. That is to say, of course, that they desire a boyhood that isn't actually a boyhood. What does it really mean to be a boy? What should it mean to be a boy? My boyhood was over 40 years ago when boys were, well, boys. Like Esalen, who opens his book with a joyful but imperfect memories of his Italian grandmother's house, I constantly hearken back to joyful but imperfect memories of my Italian grandmother's house. My mother's 100% Italian. My kids will attest to that. 1,000,000 times they've heard me begin, "At my grandmother's house." I so often fondly retreat to those days in a tiny house overflowing with kids, grandkids, aunts, uncles, the thriving humanity, the loud voices, the crazy kitchen, the card games, and Scrabble games until 4 a.m., and, of course, the food. People had their place, their rules, and we all genuinely loved it. Yes, there were shouts, disagreements, blow-ups, but there was laughter, joy, stable marriages. There was, as Tony Esalen says repeatedly in this book, a tranquility of order to it all. I could go on and on with boyhood memories. Well beyond my grandmother's house, my memories of boy time activities range from the outright wild to the patently stupid. Such is the life of boys. I remember 6 or 7 of us camping out in the woods with only sleeping bags in what turned out to be the first snowfall of the year. We nearly froze to death. My dad knew, but he let us go. It was part of being a boy and becoming a man. Only after urging from my mom, I later learned, did my dad get in the truck to fetch us. Turning the heat up considerably, I'll never forget damn near starting a small forest fire outside Brian Fleming's house. We called him Flem. One summer afternoon as we experimented with igniting various sets of brush in an overgrown lot. That was stupid. I still cringe at the thought of J.T. Zulick and I trying to smash his dad's shotgun shells with a hammer on my back porch before someone mercifully saved us. That was really stupid. And we regularly played an infamous type of football game where we tossed the ball in the air and obliterated the first sucker who dared to pick it up. I think we called that slaughter ball. But anyways, a worse fate awaited the sad sack who didn't do this boy duty and pick up the ball, which was required of whoever was closest to where it landed. I would here divulge the commonly known name for this game, universally acknowledged among boys of the era, starting with the word smear. That's right, that's what it was called, because I played that as well. But I didn't want the incensed drama queens of the New Thought Police goose-stepping to my house to arrest my children for my unforgivable sins of the 1970s. Now, I have boys of my own, 5 of them, one of which, John, I could turn into the next Calvin of Calvin and Hobbes legend if comic strips were my business. The kid provides daily material. Amid a pause in writing this forward, I heard a crash in the woods. I trekked nervously toward the noise, calling out if everything was all right. "It's okay, Daddy," responded John. "We just pushed down a tree." No one died. I lured the cabal of boys closer to the house with important news that my youngest, Ben, had just discovered a severed rabbit's foot near the porch. Upon inspection, John enthusiastically proclaimed that the dismembered appendage was actually a ripped apart and stretched out mutant dead squirrel's head. It was quite an exaggeration, but the other boys all seemed excitedly on board for that creative prognosis. There were no dissenters. All of that is part of being a boy, but it's hardly a full picture. Enter Tony Esalen with his own storytelling and his great common sense. His flashes of memory and strokes of pen are both entertaining and edifying, as is his command of everything from the arts to theology to pop culture. He starts with Augustine and St. Paul and finishes with St. Paul and Caravaggio. In between, in classic Esalen prose and style, he sprinkles in discourses coming from the young Jesus' relationship with his parents to the grown Jesus' interactions with his apostles, as well as numerous literary allusions and popular culture references, whether remarking on Tennyson or the Twilight Zone, Milton and Shakespeare and Dante, Tiger Woods and C.S. Lewis and George S. Patton, Huckleberry Finn and Horatio Storer, Rudyard Kipling and Carl Sandburg, Michelangelo and Saint Damien of Molokai, Pierre Giorgio and Dominic Savio, Laura Ingalls Wilder and Odysseus, or Tom Sawyer or Clifton Webb or Jason McCord. The latter of those characters comes from an old Western TV show, Branded, starring Chuck Connors, A Man's Man. There, Esalen invokes Saint Jose Maria Escrivia's lesser-known exhortation, be a man. It is this kind of integration of higher ideas with his wide-ranging knowledge of everything from the best poetry and books of the Western tradition to films and sports that always makes Tony Esalen's writing so engaging. His examination is more philosophical and uplifting than my personal musings of a rube growing up in western Pennsylvania smashing shotgun shells. And yet he likewise looks back wistfully at vivid stories from his own youth, again, so many of which took me back to my own childhood. Esalen begins by putting us at ease. He was raised in a structure very familiar to me personally. He and his mom and dad and younger brother and sister, precisely my family arrangement, living in a tiny house, which was big enough, and getting ready for Mass on a Sunday morning. Everyone did that. It was a duty. We all got dressed up and took it seriously, even as I never fully understood it all. Yet, to reaffirm Esalen's theme, there was a tranquility of order to it all. As he would say, things were as they should be, even when far from perfect. But there was a peace and stability that prevailed. It was comforting. We did not have, as we do today, the restlessness of disorder, as Esalen notes. Today, we can't even concede that, there are boys and girls. Heck, a boy can choose to be a girl and vice versa. It's a cultural and even spiritual insanity. Today, we flail about in uncharted waters. We live in a world in which reality is turned upside down, or at least a world in which the radical transformers are doing their best to upend it. To their eternal frustration, these ideological engineers are going to learn the hard way that this will not bring them happiness, and certainly not peace, although their misguided, if not malicious efforts will ruin many lives in the interim. There will not be tranquility amid the disorder that these cultural Jacobins wreak as they wage war on human nature and, to borrow from Jefferson's language in the Declaration, aggressively seek to undermine and redefine the laws of nature and of nature's God. Thus, this book will frustrate and infuriate the angry feminist at the university who's sure to stomp off to the community diversity czar with book in hand, consigning it to a campus blacklist with a trigger warning affixed to the cover, all in the name of tolerance, of course. This book is not for her. Esalen advises, quote, if you're a feminist who gets her teeth or grits her teeth as she drives in a man-made car fashioned from man-made metals and powered by man-drilled gasoline on man-paved roads, on your way to a man-built college with a man-laid brick buildings fitted with man-set pipes and electrical wires as you teach your charges in a partially man-financed woman's studies class about how rotten men are, then this book is not for you. Read Simone de Beauvoir instead, and weep your tears of resentment. If you are content to see boys languish in school because you are more firmly committed to the abstraction of some social equality than to doing justice to the real human beings in front of you, this book is not for you. As Esalen laments, that woman's ideal boy is a girl, or at least a boy who doesn't behave like a boy. That's what she thinks she wants amid her insatiable dissatisfaction. As she pulls into a Starbucks fully man-built, from the bricks and cement and drywall to every centimeter of wiring and plumbing, as she sips a Grand Skim latte that owes its existence to cows not raised in Greenwich Village and not milked by the Women's Studies Department at Swarthmore, as she proceeds to her ultimate destination at the Women's March, where, on a massive metal platform with speakers built by masculinity and patrolled by policemen with guns, she screams approval as Angela Davis and Ashley Judd and Madonna wail the latest nonsense about abortion and transgenderism. Esalen knows that this book is not for people like her. Such is also why people like him must write books like this. Increasingly, fewer men, especially in the academy, have the guts to write books like this, lest they offend the nature redefiners, But believe me, there are many men in the university world who would love every minute of this book, even as the militant feminized environment has cowed them into a sissified silence. That is why we need boys turned men of courage, men with chests, to speak up against the prevailing zeitgeist, against what Pope Benedict XVI called the anonymous power of changing moods and current fads and fashions. So, sit back and enjoy a sobering, sensible, and rollicking discussion and defense of Boyhood. And when you're finished, get as many copies of this book as possible to your friends and family. They need it too. And that was the foreword to the book by Anthony Esolen about defending Boyhood. Back in a minute. Thank you. That brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful. I'm Ron, and that's The Drill.